Let's begin Lesson 3 called Colonial Religious Foundation. So back in Lesson 1 we talked about the three G's of European exploration, the three reasons, gold, glory, and God. So in this one we're going to be focusing on those colonies that were founded specifically for reason 3, meaning for religious freedom. So let's take a look at our teaks. We are still in Unit 2 on colonization. We want to make sure we can put things in chronological order. The date we're going to look at now is 1620. That's an important one here. We're going to talk about how the religion tied into their government by helping them elect representatives. And we're going to look at some of the social movements, particularly one called the First Great Awakening. So let's begin. First of all, why did religious groups come to America? Well, back in Europe, most of the European countries had an official state religion, which was a form of Christianity, but they all had different versions of Christianity. In the case of England, King Henry VIII founded the Anglican Church, or better known as the Church of England. And in England, you had to be a member of the Anglican Church. Other forms of Christian beliefs were not accepted and not tolerated. One of these groups was called the Pilgrims. This was a group of separatists. They rejected the teachings of the Anglican Church, and they wanted to separate themselves from the Anglican Church. So they initially left England to go to the Netherlands, but they wanted to live as Englishmen, and truthfully, the people in the Netherlands didn't really want them either. So they were given a charter to settle in part of the Virginia colony, and they called themselves the Pilgrims. Now, unlike the case of Jamestown, which was founded by young men, many of the Pilgrims were married couples who had children already. So let's look at that date, 1620. We've already talked about 1607, the founding of Jamestown. Now here's another important date, 1620. This was the year that the Pilgrims set sail for Virginia aboard their ship, the Mayflower. On their way to Virginia, they were blown off course and ended up north of their destination in what we now call the state of Massachusetts, which you're going to see abbreviated as MA, Massachusetts. There were about 160 people aboard the Mayflower, and 41 of the men signed what was called the Mayflower Compact. Notice it's underlined, so that's an important term for you to know and to get a good definition of. The Mayflower Compact was written to establish their self-government and their English rights for colonists. It's not very long, and we're going to look at the Mayflower Compact together. So the Plymouth Settlement. They landed in November of 1620. They landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts. Just like the case of Jamestown, they arrived too late to plant crops, and just like the case of Jamestown, half of them died during that winter. However, they encountered English-speaking natives, and a lot of people ask, well, where did these natives learn their English from? They learned them from fishermen who had been exploring the coast of Canada. So they met the English-speaking natives, Squanto and Samoset, and these people helped the Pilgrims by helping them, first of all, make peace with the local natives. They also taught them how to farm and fish, and one of the natives' kind of nifty tricks was using dead fish to bury, and that dead fish made a very good fertilizer, especially for corn. So the result of this is that the Pilgrims survived their first winter with the help of natives. So the fall of 1621, they wanted to celebrate a successful harvest and the establishment of their colony. So they invited the native chief and about 90 of his men to a 3-day feast to celebrate the good harvest, and we recognize that today, and we celebrate that in current times as Thanksgiving. So the first Thanksgiving was in 1621 between the Pilgrims and the natives. Another religious group was called the Puritans. Just like the Pilgrims, they were a religious minority group from England, but while they disagreed with Anglican practices, unlike the Pilgrims, they did not want to separate from the Anglican Church so much as to purify it. They wanted to go to a more basic, simple, and biblically based version of Christianity. So they were granted a charter to move to Massachusetts, and they wanted a government established and led by the principles of the Bible. Their leader was a man named John Winthrop. I'd like you to take a moment to pause, take a look at this quote right here. So what do you think, when you're talking about religious freedom and establishing government by the Bible, what do you think John Winthrop means by this quote? Take a look at it and do some thinking, and then we'll continue. This resulted in what's called the Great Migration. So from 1629 to 1640, anywhere from 15 to 20,000 Puritans migrated from England to Massachusetts, and there they established a representative assembly just like the House of Burgesses in Virginia, but only church members were allowed to vote, and there were non-church members in the Puritan colonies, in the Massachusetts colonies. So my question to you is, if you were a non-church member in that colony, how do you think you might feel about this rule? So let's look at other colonies based on religion. Shortly after the founding of Massachusetts, you see Rhode Island and Connecticut. These were founded by people who left Massachusetts because they were unhappy with the religious restrictions of the Pilgrims who were running Massachusetts. So they formed their own colonies, and we're going to look more particularly at the government of Connecticut. Then we have Maryland. We mentioned that in England, the Church of England is the only accepted religion, and Catholics in England were persecuted by the Anglicans. So a man named Lord Baltimore wanted a refuge for English Catholics to come to, so they established the colony of Maryland, naming it after the Catholic queen, Queen Mary. Then we have Pennsylvania, which was founded by William Penn. The name Pennsylvania literally means Penn's Woods. Okay? So William Penn, he was a Quaker, again, another religious minority group. He believed in religious diversity and tolerance, including women and natives. So his ideas and his ideas for the colony and his policies were, for the time, relatively very progressive and much more liberal than what you would find in most English colonies. That's going to lead us to the First Great Awakening. Uh, by the 1730s, all of the 13 colonies are in place, and we're going to talk about the 13 colonies in our next lesson. But during this time, a religious revival movement spread through the colonies that was calling for a return to a strong Christian faith. And unlike the Anglican Church, this encouraged a more personal faith over church rituals. It encouraged people to study the Bible themselves, to read at home, and to develop their own ideas about their own personal faith. It also resulted in the creation of many new Christian denominations split off from the ones that founded the colonies. So the social effects of the First Great Awakening are, first of all, that the colonists established a belief in individual freedom of choice, and that it also united all the colonists throughout the 13 colonies in a shared religious experience which would bind them together as a group, which you're going to see have an effect later on. In fact, let's go ahead and look at our lesson 3 thoughts. Okay, number 1, what are some similarities and differences between the Pilgrims and Puritans and their choosing to migrate to America? So take a look at your notes on those two groups. Again, look at what did they have in common, but what were some differences they had. Number 2, how did the Puritan religious beliefs influence the Massachusetts colonial governments? Go back and look on the Great Migration. And number 3, here's where I'm asking you to kind of maybe do some predicting. What effect do you think the First Great Awakening would have on the colonists' beliefs about government? So take a look at those notes. Think about how that might change their thoughts about their governments and their personal rights. All right, and then we'll move on with lesson 4, and that's going to be over colonial regions.